Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's brief chat that we have titled Drugging Kids in Captivity. I am Martha Bradley Dorsey, Executive Director of the Center for K-12 Captivity Studies, and I'll explain the center a bit later. John Merrifield, my partner, is President and Chief Operating Officer of the Institute for Objective Policy Assessment, and he's an advisor to the center. Two things make the Center for K-12 Captivity Studies different from most school choice advocacy agencies out there. First of all, we focus on the structural problem of government-created and government-controlled schools. And the structural problem is crystallized in one word: captivity. By captivity, we mean mandatory attendance at the child's assigned public school in order for that child to get what many think of as free schooling. And by structural, we mean that this captivity is created by conditions that are policy instruments. And these conditions, these policy conditions, create the very exact operational mechanisms of the public schools that cause this captivity to be egregious. And it also affects the attitudes and the culture of public schools personnel. So the center's goal also is to free all U.S. children. This goal will require a change in strategy. We cannot free all kids, by going on the defensive and adding whatever one or more programs might make it through any particular state's legislative process to allow only some of that state's kids to have partial educational freedom. Instead, we have to find a way to eliminate district schools' authority to hold students captive. So instead of adding a patchwork of state approved programs that are all different, we seek to eliminate all district schools all around the nation to the district authority to hold schools captive. Therefore, only through doing this, we will finally allow families everywhere in every state to have the freedom to choose other than government-controlled schools. Today, we're talking about one of what we hypothesize is a damaging effect of captivity, and that is drugging kids in public schools to make them more pliable to the classroom setting. 20 years ago, Joel Turtel wrote Public Schools, Public Menace, in which he described the extensive use of drugs for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, in U.S. public schools. John has been reading up on this to see what's been happening for the last 20 years and how we might study that to determine the extent of the problem and what might be done about it. So with that, let me just ask you, John, how has prescription drug use in public schools changed over time for U.S. kids?
Well, it seems to have increased, and that's one of the things that we need to examine through our objective assessment process here at the Institute. We need to engage a diverse set of perspectives and expertise in this process because we apparently, from Joel Turtel's work about 20 years ago, we have identified a very suspicious problem that seems to be a result of confining children to a particular school, which forces, through the political process, attempts at producing a one-size-fits-all situation. And then when we assign all the children that live in a particular area to the same school, we create what many people have termed an impossible, at least for the vast majority of teachers, an impossible differentiated instruction challenge. And the impossibility of that challenge means that a lot of children are not engaged in what's going on in their classroom. So they act out, they act hyper, there's that hyperactive disorder thing, or they just totally disconnect because the material is either uninteresting to them, presented in an uninteresting way, or is just way over their heads. So we have a broad spectrum of engagement factors in any given public school system classroom, and that creates the perception that some children are not functional without medication. And part of the suspicious aspect of this is that in the United States, we use the vast majority of these drugs that are assigned to our children. And so that creates some suspicion of, well, are we just on the leading edge of addressing a problem? Probably not, because this was a massive problem 20 years ago. And I think we need to reestablish, we need to re-update. I think we're still the leading country by far in terms of using Ritalin and Adderall and other common medications prescribed to our children. And also because of captivity, we have a terrible situation where parents that are resisting the medication of their children don't have an alternative. They can't leave that school because it's the only one that they can afford to attend. They can't even switch to another public school because it may have more expensive housing near it, or it may be further from their job or something. So we have the firm basis of a hypothesis, several hypotheses. We'll stick to one right now, the main one, that captivity, assigning children to a particular school, and thus creating a huge differentiated instruction challenge for the teachers there, that's partly or wholly responsible for the fact that we use way more drugs for our kids, seemingly. And I say seemingly because these are all things that need to be investigated than other countries do. And indeed, we have a greater degree of captivity in the United States. Other countries, the vast majority, have way more ability to access alternatives to the assigned school than we do.
So, John, one of the things that Tertel wrote in his book was that Ritalin was the drug of choice, and that was 20 years ago. Adderall was, I think, a close second, according to his statistics. But as I read currently, we have now, through the big pharma, created a whole host of other drugs in addition to these two that children can use. So it appears that it's possible that not only has Ritalin and Adderall use increased, but that we've now been giving other drugs to children. We know that drug use in children is something that is concerning because children's development is at a different stage than it is for adults, and sometimes they react differently to these drugs. So that seems to be a concern. We don't know whether all of these things are happening, but it seems to me that we will need to be analyzing on a couple of levels because of some of these things. First of all, we need to look at what you described as the uniform requirements inside the classroom that put any individual student potentially on the outskirts of this uniform classroom, because as we all know, every individual is different. So we've got that whole education side, but then we have a medical side, and these two things have been blended in this recommended use of drugs. And so we will need to examine things from a number of levels. Because of that, John, would you be interested in talking about what you see in terms of the study that we would want to do?
Yeah, well, we need to investigate the connection between the different degrees of captivity. So we need some diversity in our data set in terms of how much captivity exists, how much freedom exists for parents to move their children to a different school that better engages their children. We'll make clear to our audience, we're not talking necessarily about quality, because quality is a multidimensional thing, and it's often treated like a single-dimensional thing, good schools, bad schools. We're talking about unique children fitting into a particular school, and they may not fit into that school, even though other kids do. It may be seen as a good school because it is good at executing what it aims to do, but it still is, one size is never going to fit all anywhere. That's the essence of, part of the essence of the captivity problem is we place children in an environment where the political process mandates the attempt to make one size fit all, and it never will. And that's where that differentiated instruction challenge comes from, that only the most gifted, rare teachers can master. And so, and part of this is we've incentivized big pharma, a big special interest to resist the transformational school system reform that we desperately need. And plus, we've incentivized teachers to recommend this medication because it narrows the range of differentiated instruction that they need to attempt. And now we're holding teachers responsible for failing at this immense task that captivity creates, namely the broad spectrum of interest and engagement factors that exist in any given. So we've created a mess.
Okay, so let me interrupt right here because that certainly highlights what we have to do with respect to the education side of this. But when you and I have been talking, we've also been discussing the idea of opening this up in a broader sense to include medical experts as well.
Absolutely.
Because we have, as I understand it, first of all, there's a question as to whether the diagnosis of ADHD is even valid, either in one or two or 50 or all cases of ADHD. It depends, of course, on one's definition of ADHD, but also on the goals that one has to describe this. And one of the things that I know I was reading is that ADHD symptoms can result from the taking of other drugs for other reasons. ADHD symptoms can result from medical issues that aren't drug related, and so then they mimic what is defined as ADHD. There are lots of different things that mix together, and so we are, you and I, and I'm sure others, very concerned about the fact that we might be overusing ADHD drugs for the kids who might benefit from them, but we might be using them incorrectly for a bunch of other kids. In order to figure all that out, we've got to get the medical side involved. Would you agree with that? Do you have any?
Absolutely. We take very seriously here at the Institute for Objective Policy Assessment the word objective. We're going to not only engage different people because they have different expertise, but within the different areas, medical, economic, political, we're going to engage people who have different views on those matters. We're here to enlighten moving forward, and so the only way to enlighten moving forward is to allow civil, robust discussion, including informed disagreement. So yeah, we're gonna definitely do that. But I want to emphasize for our viewers, and by the way, please visit us at policytalk.org to get more information on this. But I want to emphasize to our viewers that part of the reason for this video is to engage you in this process, or to engage somebody that you know that is interested in this, because this is a huge task. Not only does captivity have many well-documented effects and many highly likely hypothesized effects, of which this is just one, but this one in particular has many dimensions: medical, etc., economic, political. So we need to move forward in a way that will be enlightening and ultimately compelling. When I meet somebody that disagrees with me on something, I tell them, whatever we can agree on, we'll be able to move forward powerfully. So we want to make sure that we find areas of agreement, and then we will also discover areas where we need research to inform further discussion and consensus, or identifying areas where we agree to disagree. And that in itself is as enlightening as anything else we can do.
And when you talk about finding areas in which we can agree, we do still have our principles, and our principles, our foundational principles within the Center for K-12 Captivity Studies are, first of all, that captivity causes a lot of problems and is a weak structural element, and actually a damaging structural element. We hypothesize that the drugging of kids falls under that grand hypothesis.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, that we need to do is to realize that there are some areas, including what we just talked about, that we're not going to compromise on. We want to instead study them objectively.
Yeah.
So we're not going to walk away from them and turn a blind eye to the things that we believe are very concerning because of K-12 captivity in this country. So I just wanted to make that a point. The other point that I thought that you might want to discuss is that there is not any way that our small effort can possibly get all of this studying done. So we are inviting others to help us, to contribute, to work on this issue with us. And I think you mentioned that before, but I wanted to put it in terms of studying it. And if we can get groups together to do these studies and work voluntarily together, it might help things along much more quickly than it would if our small efforts try to go forward, because drugging kids is just one of many, many issues that we are concerned about. So
Yes, and they're all interconnected. I mean, captivity is the central element that we seek to remove, that we believe will create a momentum that will alleviate many of these problems. But we have a lot of work to do to be persuasive, to move things forward through either legislation or litigation, and that's what we aim to do. And we hope that we can enlist expertise, diverse perspectives within each expertise. And yeah, we have to mention this because things do cost money. We invite help on the financial side too. We believe we're doing God's work, and please help us.
thank you so much. Once again, our little chat session here, we titled Drugging Kids in Captivity. And we ask you to examine the other goals that we have and the other things that we're doing. And thank you so much for being here and listening.
Yeah, and you'll find our contact information at policytalk.org. So please visit that site and please be in touch.
Thanks so much. Bye.